Absolutely. Thank you. Good to see you. So just kind of having the candidates looking down on the ground here. Very small. Cool. Hi, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Daniel Weeks. So kind of give a rundown of how this is going to work. I'm going to read his bio, and then I'm going to ask the leading question. You'll have about 10 to 15 minutes to respond to that question, and then I'll hand it over to the audience to ask their questions and get some answers. And we will have you use the mic just because we're live streaming, so we want to make sure that people that are watching at home can hear. So I'll get started here with your bio. So Dr. Daniel Weeks has served as President and Vice Chancellor at the University of Northern British Columbia since 2014. Under his leadership, the university has twice been named the top university in Canada in its category and recently was recognized by Times Higher Education as among the top 4% of universities in the world. He previously was the Vice President for Research at the University of Lethbridge and served in numerous academic roles over 16 years at Simon Fraser University, including Chair of the Department of Psychology, founding member of the Institute for Health Research and Education, and the Graduate Program Chair of the School of Kinesiology. Weeks holds a PhD in experimental psychology from Auburn University, a Master of Science in Kinesiology from McMaster University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Windsor. So the first question that we have for you today is, how would you advance the mission of Boise State University in the context of the challenges facing public higher education today? Thanks for being here.
Put that in here and great. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and have a chance to talk to all of you. I just really honestly want to just talk for a very few minutes. I'd rather have a conversation if we could and have a little bit of a dialogue about some of the things that challenge you. When I was asked to answer a question about the challenges facing post-secondary and how to address them, it's a tall order to do in any amount of time. And quite frankly, the list changes daily. The challenges facing universities now, there's some of the more typical ones, the ones that happen all the time. Keeping our enrollment numbers up, differentiation, quality of our programs. These are the challenges we all face on a regular basis, but there's a whole host of more new and emerging types of issues. Our responsibility around diversity and ensuring that we have a diverse student body, a diverse faculty and staff. Also, things like student mental health, which is now an emerging issue across North America, in fact across the world in many cases. Just issues of quality of life, and that's just today's list. I mean, and tomorrow there'll be other factors on it as well, so they constantly change. I mean, I think the thing that I want you to understand about me and what I'm interested in really have to do more about how we live our values, how we really roll out a set of strategies around initiatives that will capture all of those things that I just talked about. So really, at almost every university, if you look at their strategic plan, they're all pretty much the same. They all have the same pillars to them, and this university is no different. The pillars are attracting excellent students, faculty, staff, having high quality academic programs, in this case, enhancing the research culture of the university, and sustainability. And I mean that in the broadest sense. So sustainability not only of our campus and our campus environment, but also sustainability of our faculty, sustainability financially, all those things. So sustainability in the broadest sense. So I think the things I would focus on really would be captured under any one of those, and we can unpack them, I think, as we go forward. But I think, let me just leave you with this idea that fundamentally, I think you all know or should know that I serve at the pleasure of the board. That's who hires the president, and I serve at their pleasure. But that's an explicit understanding. Implicitly, I honestly believe I serve at the pleasure of the faculty, the students, the staff, and the alumni. Without your support, doesn't matter if I'm implicitly at the pleasure of the board, because the position is unsustainable without the support of the campus community. So with that, I'd really like to just get into a dialogue with all of you, and I want to hear, you know, it's easy for me to tell you that this institution, from my perspective, is doing an awful lot of things really well. And its trajectory is excellent. But I'm only looking at it from one lens, you know, and for the next few minutes I'd like to help me look at it through your lens and really make me understand, you know, are we doing things as well as it looks to me, or are there major gaps in areas? And I'm sure there's always small things we can do, but I'd like to hear, you know, both big and small, what are those issues, and how does your perspective play into the view that I have that this is a pretty great place?
So who wants to ask the first question?
Hi.
Hi.
So I am probably going to be asking a few questions because I'm
okay.
representing a few groups here today. So the first is going to be specific to Title IX and Title IX universities. Currently, Boise State doesn't have a standing Title IX coordinator. We just haven't had one for, I believe it's like the past 2 years. What steps are you going to take to ensure that our Title IX program is up to standards, running efficiently, and actually gets a person dedicated in to be working, as well as that person gets the resources that they need in order to fulfill their jobs, which was not the case with the last Title IX coordinator?
So can you, I don't know what happened in the past case. Is there any history that you could share with me? So why is the position not filled? Is it just timing, or is it more than that?
I am personally unsure. We have had one person in compliance filling the position for receiving the Title IX cases, as well as everything else in compliance. Kat Davis, I believe is her name. But there's no one specific to manage Title IX cases, as should be the case in many universities.
So that's, it's interesting that the university would let itself be in that position, because so let's talk about it from a practical point of view, and then from a moral imperative, really. From a practical point of view, it places the university at considerable jeopardy. We're at risk. I can tell you that boards never like the president to put the university at risk. Not a good thing. But then, of course, there's also I think a more fundamental human rights sort of standard here to be met as well, that this is simply the right thing to do. I have also noted, on a similar vein, in the last session we just had in here with the faculty and staff, I made the observation too that just the general issue here of diversity, inclusion, and equity have been dealt with really by committee here. That's not enough. That's clearly not enough. And so I would be seeking to fill a position of an equity officer, diversity officer of some sort at some level. I would have to have a conversation, obviously, with the other executive about the level. If I had my personal just, here, do whatever you want, Dan, it would be at a vice presidential level. I think so I would like to have that conversation in the context of the Title IX as well, so that maybe there's a way to think about how to address this all in one kind of approach that would ensure that we don't split up the resources and cut them up too finely. Maybe we can gain some efficiency and you know, by putting some things together like this to ensure that we have the kind of structure that we have. So I'm sorry that I don't know why the position's unfilled, but I would find out immediately and report back to you why it's not filled and what steps will be to make that change.
Thank you. I really am a student.
I believe you.
I'm a French major.
Congratulations.
Yeah. But we've had a larger group of students in here. As you know, it's dead week, and so we didn't get quite the attendance this week. But a group of us who are very interested in the relative lack of diversity on campus, not only among the students, but among the faculty members. And for those who, for one reason or another, ethnic background, their gender non-conforming, whatever it is, often don't find the campus very inclusive. I tend to be a nuts and bolts person, and so this is going to be rather than general sort of things. But one of the things that I noticed in your bio is this involvement with Aboriginal peoples. And I was wondering if you had, I realize you're in a different country, and so in terms of funding opportunities and things like that, it's not something that you've spent a lot of time looking at so far. But do you have any kind of vision of how the campus could sort of draw into its activities, its orbit, what we in this country call Native American peoples? And there are several different groups here in Idaho, both to make sure that secondary ed students actually graduate, that they see the university as a place to have opportunities and give themselves a greater scope of future activities, and then also to mentor students, not only as undergraduates, but to bring in somehow graduate students of Native American backgrounds who then can be mentored perhaps to be faculty members or, depending on their interests, staff members at the university. And I'd just be interested to have you talk about that a bit.
Yeah, sure. I'll get to your last point a little bit later on, because that's a particularly and unique challenge that's turned out to be much more difficult than I would have ever imagined. Yes, you made me realize, and I should apologize in my opening this morning with a much larger. This group's far more informal, so I didn't quite think of it the same way. But I did recognize in my opening comments this morning that I'm a guest and honored to be on the traditional territory of the Shoshone Bannock, and it's a great honor to be here in that context. I think you begin that commitment with symbols and symbols, and it really are such a fundamental part of it. The institution that I'm currently at was built on First Nations land. When I arrived, we really didn't have a very formal relationship with the very peoples that on whose land our university was built. We now fly their flag on our campus. We are in the process of adding signage to all our buildings and our campus that will also include the local language of the First Nations peoples. These are symbols of welcome. These are symbols that ensure that individuals from those cultures can come to our campus and see themselves in that campus. And as I did say in the previous session, we don't own this university. I don't own it. You don't own it. It belongs to the people of this region. It belongs to we simply are custodians and stewards of this institution while we're here. So the community belongs to all the individuals in our region. Therefore, the community, this institution should find ways to portray that welcome. And so again, symbols become, I think, an incredibly important piece of that. I've also in fact, next month we'll launch an advisory council of elders who will advise me on how to further the relationship with Aboriginal peoples, Indigenous peoples. We also have relationships with Indigenous peoples in other parts of the world. So we have an exchange program with the Maori in New Zealand that allows some of our students to go there and theirs to come to our campus. So there is much that can be done here. I'd be very interested in looking to things like tuition waivers and things that we could use to encourage more diversity amongst particularly First Nations peoples of this area. While I was at Lethbridge, I argued strongly and really, I think I didn't succeed at this, I must say, but I think the reason it just became intractable by our finance office. But I made the argument that we should treat Indigenous Indigenous and Aboriginal peoples by their own territory, not by arbitrary lines on a map that denote Canada and the United States. So the largest reservation in Canada is actually just north of here. It's the Blackfoot. They're in southern Alberta and also in Idaho and Montana. And so I argued that we should treat all of those individuals as if they're in-state students, so to speak. There's no reason simply because they cross over the border that we impose on them that somehow that should then turn those students into international students. It makes absolutely no sense. I've also, at my current institution, which I'm pushing this idea, is I'd like to actually see tuition free for Aboriginal peoples from any country in the world as defined by the UN. So is there a way that we can make that work? Now again, people in finance should just pull their hair out because they think this is just intractable, right? But I think we can get there and we can do it. So symbols and those kinds of initiatives to make individuals welcome, I think, are incredibly important pieces of what we do. We offer experiential courses where students go out and work with Aboriginal communities to build a canoe or build this is part of experiential learning on our campus. Those things are all possible here. There's no reason that they can't be done. Your last bit about about getting Indigenous scholars and others to come. This is proving to be an incredibly difficult undertaking, simply because, unfortunately, there are not nearly enough such scholars anywhere. So in Canada, many universities have toyed with the idea of having required courses about Canada's Aboriginal history. That's a great idea, but most of them are going to be taught by old white men, which is just not acceptable because there just isn't enough Indigenous scholars to do this. So how you roll these things out are going to be challenging, actually, going forward. But I don't disagree with you about the. Also, I even naively thought about something like a visiting postdoctoral program or something for Indigenous scholars. Well, any Indigenous scholar coming out right now has more job opportunities than you could shake a stick at. So having something like a postdoctoral, it won't work. It just won't work. So again, even though I think I'm clever sometimes in some of these things, it really is a challenging thing. But I think engaging with the communities and recognize that they're part of our communities is fundamentally important. I'm sorry?
Our numbers are increasing.
Yes. Wow. We're overwhelmed now.
Good afternoon. My name is Connor Johnson. I'm the current president of the Interfraternity Council on this campus. Unfortunately, the sorority president and the Multicultural Council president couldn't be here today. Dead week, everybody's kind of stressing. But I wanted to talk to you today about Greek life on campus. We've been around for a little less than 10 years, and we've seen rapid growth. Mm-hmm. We now make up about 9% of the population of Boise State. We've grown about 700% in the last 2 years. Across the country, we've seen many Greek institutions that have been standing for hundreds of years being shut down. And to clarify on that, that's not to say that we look down on those closures, because usually those closures are due to responses to immoral acts that have been fundamentally rooted in those Greek systems. I believe, and many other Greeks believe, that we do not have those immoral roots in our campus. At our campus, we try to be positive in our community and try to engage with a lot of different groups, including helping out our community and helping out our campus as well. As we continue to grow, and it doesn't show any signs that we're going to be slowing down anytime soon, we continuously are at a need for spaces for Greeks to express themselves. We don't have a Greek row for housing. We mostly conduct most of our meetings in the sub. So I guess the question that I have for you is what would you do to help facilitate that growth, given that the Greeks continue to be morally upstanding students at Boise State?
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that. So, keep me out of the newspaper for all the bad reasons and make sure I get in the newspaper for all the good ones is what I would tell you. Listen, let me just say, first of all, I didn't grow up in a university with a Greek culture, although in my time at Auburn was quite an experience for a Canadian student. The Greek system there is huge. I could tell you many stories, and most of them good. But no, I have recognized, I have done a little bit of digging as much as I could. The Greek system here looks very strong and upstanding. I think you see it as I do, that if done correctly, it can be an important part of a student's experience, just as in many ways similar to being a student athlete. In some ways, it can be a really positive experience. It can contribute to your growth as a citizen and a contributing member of a community. I'm also happy to see you're engaged in community service. I think that's absolutely fundamental. So insofar as it stays like that, I'm completely in favor of supporting the continued growth. I haven't looked at the campus master plan yet, but if you haven't, then you need to engage with the likely vice president of finance that takes care of that. Look at what are the long-term plans for the development of the campus. Is something like a Greek Row, is that in the works? Is that even in the thinking? I think it would be prudent. I mean, to have it somewhere in our thinking. Master plans are plans. Those plans change over time, so I don't think there's anything at risk to put something like that in place, and at least have a placeholder for that possibility. So at this point, I'm a supporter and would look forward to you doing continued great work, and wherever possible, sharing with you the opportunity to be positive contributors to the university.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Jay. I'm sorry for showing up late. I'm a member of the Inclusive Excellence Student Council here at Boise State and a graduating sociology major. And my question is about student involvement within decision-making processes at universities. And something that's interesting about our campus, I've been here for 5 years and very active on our campus, is we very rarely have students or seats available for students to be within decision-making processes. So if we look at like the hiring committee for our incoming president, we had 1 student on our committee. If we look at the Diversity Inclusion Commission, which I was one of the students, there was only 4 of us. And my question to you is, to what extent do you see student involvement within the decision-making process, and to what extent would you ensure that more students are able to be at those tables? Thinking for myself, I'm supposed to represent 22 to 24,000 students at a time, which is impossible to do. And when we look at our student body government, we have very low participation in it, from like 1,200 in this last year. This last election was 1,900, which is predominantly Greek life, which participates. And so it doesn't always capture every experience on our campus. So those would be my questions to you.
Oh, excellent. Well, I think students should play a vital role in all decision-making activities. It is a fairly commonplace in Canadian institutions. It's now it does vary to some extent. There's everything from, in some institutions you'll have a very prescriptive sense of there must be 2 students from each faculty, 1 student does this, another student from that constituency. On a presidential search committee, it would vary at some institutions from having 3 or 4 or 5 to 1 is also possible. That really depends on the situation and what is the best way to capture the kind of student input that you want. Because I think that's the way you should really view this. It's not about, I'm sorry to tell you, it's not just about the numbers, although that sounds a bit overwhelming, but it's really about, do we have the right people in the room? Because the benefit is to the decision that's being made, right? We want to make the best decision possible. So the more diversity around that by people who could give us the broadest understanding of what that decision should or shouldn't be is going to be to the benefit of the whole institution. So I am very committed to student involvement in many decisions. So for example, on our campus, we do not, and I would take a similar tack here, we do not engage any fee changes, for example, that affect students that don't have the support of the student leadership. We don't do it. Now, that's not to say it doesn't get done. Some places do it, and I haven't had to do it yet, but there may become a time when I'll say, sorry, I know you don't want this, but this is what's going to happen. But that has never happened to me. We tend not to do that. In fact, just recently, we had a fee that we were putting on for an alumni fee once you graduate, for graduating students. Students were adamant that this was not acceptable to them, and the day of our board meeting, that morning, we pulled it from the board package and did not go forward with it. So the students have a very powerful voice. They don't always feel like they do, but they have an extraordinarily powerful voice on our campus, and again, I think it adds to the quality of the decision making that we do. So I'd be willing to look at, how can we, without getting too marred down in having this long prescriptive policy that says, 5 students of this type and that type and from this place and that place, is there a way we can say this is the best, first cut at how we would get good representation and good dialogue? That's really what it's about. You want good conversation at it. So I come from a place where student involvement is commonplace. I would find it uncommon that there wasn't a student participation in these things. So I think that should tell you where I go with this.
Okay. Yate. Hello, good afternoon, Dr. Weeks. I'd like to ask you, I got intrigued by looking at your paper. It says experimental psychology. It's very interesting. I got to ask you a question though. How do you believe your knowledge and experience in this field and your past experiences will help contribute to our university?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks. It's interesting. I get to tell people I have a doctorate in an area that really doesn't exist anymore. So experimental psychology has really been subsumed. In most circles, I tell people I'm a neuroscientist because that's really what's subsumed the field. I study the control of human movement, so how the brain controls action. And I've done that in a number of contexts. I've done it in industrial contexts, so it applies to how people do work. It applies to sport and athletics, which is some of the most incredible movement. Also art, dance is an amazing, beautiful movement. Even the most complicated movement that humans do is actually speech. Speech is the most amazing thing that humans can do to formulate words with their mouth. So I've done that work also. Another big chunk of my work has been with some unique populations. In particular, a large part of my work has been with persons with Down syndrome. I'm taking this long conversation here to take you to a place. That work for many, many years was basic laboratory research, and I would say over time I changed as a human myself. I changed, and the subjects of my research started to become my friends, and those friends became people that I advocated for. And once I sort of began to slow down my research work, I got involved in the national organization in Canada. Then I became involved in Down Syndrome International and worked on the world stage to advocate for the rights of persons with Down syndrome around the world. I've done missions to Iraq. I've done missions Iraq, yeah, wow, that was a trip. I've done missions all over the world, helping countries set up services and the kinds of programs they need. It really has led me to a rather unique view of what diversity really means, and how we can and how people of all types should be included in our society. And so my research has been a big part of my interest in university leadership.
Hello again. So many students, faculty, and staff have begun the push for open educational resources on campus, also known as OER, in order to allow students to have a broader depth and breadth of information available to them, while also lowering textbook costs, since textbooks are often very unnecessarily expensive. I don't know if this is something you have at your university. If so, are you going to help with this push on campus, and what steps would you do to allow our students to further their voice in the search for OER?
Yeah. Yes, we actually have a province-wide initiative around this. Open textbooks are a big push by our government. Actually wants us to employ this because, again, they see it. Yeah, our government. I can see this look of skepticism over it, but our government sees it this way: that lessening the burden on students financially around things like textbooks and other kinds of educational materials is a way for them to minimize student debt. It's a way for them to ensure that those students that can then graduate and become good tax-paying citizens even sooner. I mean, they have a motive here for doing it, but nonetheless, it's regardless of their motives, it's still a darn good idea. And so I think whatever we can do, I think we should try to support this in any way we can. I think it's a fantastic initiative. So it makes both economic sense. It also makes good pedagogical sense as well. I mean, that materials are more readily available, that there's a broader range of those materials. It requires some extra help and not help, but effort, I would say, on sometimes on the side of the faculty members and instructors, who sometimes have to do a little bit of extra work there to understand how to access those materials themselves, how to integrate them into their lectures and using those kinds of things. Let's be honest, it is easier just to buy a textbook for them, right? Not necessarily for you. So I think you have an excellent teaching learning center here that can help with that and begin it. So I would be a strong advocate of it. And it doesn't work for everything, not yet. I think someday it will work for everything. It doesn't work for everything yet, but we should be early adopters. This university is carving itself out as being the center of an emerging tech hub in Idaho and in this region. I mean, it only makes sense that we be early adopters on things like this.
Hi, my name's Emily Rembert.
Hi.
I'm involved in student government here. And I had a question. Boise State is growing exponentially fast, and communicating with over 24,000 students is tough. So how do you plan to not only deal with our growth physically as a university, but relationally with students? And how will you foster that communication even in tough times?
Yeah. I get asked all the time when I travel around and give talks or whatever, and people always ask me, so what's the biggest challenge being a university president? And the answer is easy. It's always the same. It's communication. It's our biggest challenge. It's communicating widely, broadly, and frequently enough to really have meaningful dialogue. It's definitely not an easy thing to do. You just have to work at it. We have to, I think we have a good communications department here that will help with that. I'll look for other avenues to do it. I like social media. I use that. In fact, I use social media primarily to let my campus know where I am. So they know what I'm doing. So I'm always showing I'm here working with this on Twitter and other things. So I think that's a useful tool as well. And then I know it doesn't get. This is probably a little bit counter to what you're telling me to do, and I know it doesn't get to the broadest group of students. But I've found that more intimate conversations in a smaller setting, someone like this actually, are really beneficial to really finding out what's going on. I often go down to the cafeteria and I stand in line and then I wait to kind of just hear a few students chit-chatting, and I say, hey, I'll buy you lunch, and I do. I buy 3 or 4 students lunch, and we just sit down and I say, so tell me what's going on, and I find out so much doing that. It's a really great way of learning what's going on campus. So I do that every once in a while, and again, it doesn't get that big broad cut that you're suggesting, but it really does often tap into some really deep issues that I might not have known about had I not done this. So it's communicate. I'll look to our communications department here to help me with really establishing what they think are the best avenues to do that. And then also I know you do like an annual, and again, please, nothing I say here is in any way disparaging about your current president or previous presidents. Everyone has their own style. They do what they do. I know you have something like a State of the University address each year, but I don't do that actually, because I have town halls throughout the year, particularly around our budget. We have lots of town halls around the budget, so we let people know what's happening in the development of our budget, what it looks like it might be this year. We try to socialize that as much as we can so no one gets any surprises when the budget comes out. So I like those things. And in fact, by the end of the year, a town hall, a State of the University address would be a repeat of everything I've done all year. There's nothing new. And I think communication needs to be much more frequent than an annual sort of thing. It needs to be. So maybe it's a monthly town hall on a particular topic or something. I haven't landed on all the opportunities yet, but I think be prepared for lots of conversation, because I think conversation is a good thing.
How will you ensure there is diversity of thought, both conservative and liberal, encouraged on campus and in the classroom?
Well, I think I'm not going to seek out liberal or conservative thought. I'm not going to seek it out. It's for people to tell me. I'm everybody's president. Everybody. So you have something to tell me, and everyone has the floor. Everyone can have their moment on the floor, and your politics or your leanings, to some extent, are rather. I'm really not interested in them. You know, I'm more interested in what you have to say, and so I think so. I think the way I would answer your question is my effort should be around making sure everyone gets an opportunity, anyone gets an opportunity to speak, to engage, to have a dialogue, have a conversation about things that affect you.
Hi. So part of my work this last year on the Inclusive Excellence Student Council has been to understand the experiences of queer and trans students on our campus. And so I, along with former faculty and current professional staff, went around campus and interviewed members within community. And we found some really consistent themes amongst not only students, but we also spoke with staff, faculty, and alumni who are within community about their experiences on campus. And we found that there was a consistent finding of folks not having a centralized location for resources or community, and to follow that there's a desire and actually a need for that on our campus. And so
you don't have a gay pride center, or
no.
Wow, okay. You will.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, actually.
You will, yeah.
Part of what we've been doing is writing up, we're currently undergoing like the entail of writing up what our findings and our proposals to the president's office, which will then go into the next president, who will be here. And my question to you would be, would you take an active role, and what tangible actions would you take to ensure that a pride or a queer and trans center would get created on our campus?
Absolutely. So on my own campus, the Pride Center was supported by the student union. The student union's funding was challenging, and they were unable to continue the support. They wanted to cut that. I could understand not why they would want to cut that, but I did understand the financial challenges. So I took over the funding of that office myself. So they have a space on campus. It's theirs to use as they choose. It's in the student union building. I just pay the rent on the space. I would expect we would do the same thing here. We have had some. You know, we're not immune to bigotry and racism in Canada, believe it or not. Although we seem to portray that we're not internationally, we have it as well. We did have some unfortunate incidents. Nothing violent or anything like that, but unfortunate. Funny story to tell you, that I went down to right after I heard about something that had occurred. I went down to the Pride Center to make sure that everyone felt safe. Someone went into their office and made a lot of, you know, rather vulgar statements and things. And so I went down just to see if everyone was feeling okay, and saw a few students there and talked to them, gave one of them a hug and said, I hope you're okay, and I want you to know you're safe here, and stuff. And then, as I was leaving, one student said, and who are you? Are you with security? No, I'm the president. Really? That was really funny. Anyway, and then I heard back later that how pleased they were that we went down. We also fly the pride flag on our campus. I think that's an important statement about who we are as an institution. And lastly, that whole experience that I just told you about, it being at the Pride Center, really moved me in an interesting way. And at this upcoming convocation, we'll be having the opportunity for anyone who self-identifies as LGBTQ. There'll be an opportunity to wear a lanyard, pride-colored lanyard, to signify that as they march in commencement. So I think that's an interesting and great opportunity to demonstrate that, again, we walk the walk. You know.
Hello again. Earlier in the beginning, I heard you mention about mental health a while back in the beginning of the talk. I'd like to go a little bit deeper in that. Mm-hmm. How important do you think this issue needs to be addressed, and how do you plan to go about it on this campus?
Well, the simple answer, it's incredibly important. This is a big issue, and I think this is an iceberg issue. I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. I don't think we even have we being the big picture of post-secondary education across North America. I don't think we really have a grip on just how serious this is just yet. The challenge is, and I think universities have done their best to kind of try to put things in place and to address it. The challenge is becoming, and please don't take anything I'm saying here, let me preface it by saying I don't mean this in a crass way at all, I'm just going to say it as it is. The challenge is now becoming that universities are not healthcare providers, and that's not our role in society, we're something else. So how do we now, because as I see the problem getting so significant, how do we, you know, if we're not careful, the healthcare system is going to expect us to take on this challenge completely. I don't think that's fiscally responsible. In fact, I don't think it's even from a healthcare point of view, it's responsible. You know, we don't have the level of expertise that a mental health facility or a hospital or others might have to do this kind. So I'm starting to think more and more about how we would partner with healthcare providers as an institution and try to raise the quality of support that we provide. Because I'm starting to believe now that we could throw every dollar we have in our budget at this, and I don't think it'd be enough anymore. And so we're beginning to do the job of other sectors of our society. We have to figure out how to be partners in this. Way back at the back there, somebody has a... I know you couldn't find a seat up front, but...
Hi, my name is Alma, and I'm an undergrad student here.
Hi, Alma.
So what would you do when a group of students are being targeted about their immigration status? So, for example, last year, number 45 attempted to end DACA. Our current president, Bob, sent out a mass email saying everything will be okay, and that was it. What would you do differently?
Oh, Emma, I wish I had a good answer for you. I don't know. I would take everybody to my house, I guess. Honestly, you know, I don't mean to make a joke of this. It's a catastrophic situation. And I know many universities in Canada are actively, you know, looking at opportunities for DACA students to come to Canada. If I was to come here, I would rather not see that happen, since I'm no longer would be in Canada. So I'd rather see students stay here. I think, again, we have to stick with our, you know, I don't have the full answer, but let me give you this simplistic answer. We have to stick to our values and what matters to a university. And I think if you do that, then the answer is clear. That I think you can't be Pollyannish either. To suggest that everything's going to be okay is, I think, a bit Pollyannish in this. There are going to be some significant challenges going forward, but I think we have to be there as an institution. It's our responsibility to do that. As I said earlier, this is not our institution. This belongs to our community, and those students are just as much part of our community as anyone else. And I know you need a better answer than that, and I'll get you one.
Hi, this is kind of related to the last question that was asked regarding mental health. However, to kind of narrow the scope a little bit down, a lot of the problems that are happening at Boise State University specifically is just coming out of funding allocation. Simply the model that Boise State University Health Services does is that it just charges insurance companies and then charges student fees as well as any other funding that it can get from the state board. Currently, University Health Services, specifically the counseling department, is seeing a lot of funding shortages in terms of hiring more counselors and being able to go out and meet students where they are at. So what steps would you take in order to encourage that more funding, either from the state board or student fees or whichever route it is that you believe would be more pragmatic to take in order to actually increase that funding and provide the funding that counseling services needs?
Yeah, you know, I'm not aware of what the capacity is that remains in trying to just simply increase the funding you know, allocations from those different pots. My suspicion is they're probably already far, if they're not maxed out, they're probably even over already. One of the things I'd like to explore here is, you know, this state is, I know it's big, but it's not that big. The catchment area for my institution is the size of France. So put it in that context. I have a campus. The next campus would be like flying across Europe in one of our smaller campuses. So this state is not that large, and really a population of, I don't know, around 2 million or maybe a little less than that. One of the things I'd like to, is it actually higher? A little higher than 2 million now? So, but again, you know, it's not so much that one of the things I'd really like to explore is there an opportunity around this initiative to partner with the other post-secondary institutions to come up with a far more efficient and pragmatic way to deal with this. It's not like we're unique. Every other institution in the state is dealing with the same challenges. Every college, all the other universities. Can we come up with a partnership here that would allow us to have more resources? Perhaps some of those resources could be mobile and move between our institutions, that we could bring more people to bear on, particularly when around critical incidents that you have. So you have something that's very significant and you need to mobilize even more resources. There's no reason that we couldn't pull people from other institutions to do that. I really believe there has to be, you need a bit of a game changer way to deal with this, because just feeding this beast with more money isn't really going to get you too much further, because as I said, the problem is that big. So I'd like to explore some other opportunities, other ideas, and I suspect that, you know, again, not to be too cynical, although that's the Canadian form of humor, is cynicism. So, but not to be too cynical, I think your governments here are always attracted to ideas that look like you're trying to make more with less. So I think if you packaged it in that way to say, look, we think we could be more efficient if we did mental health in this way, I think you might find them receptive to that. That's one idea.
Hi again.
I'm not going to see this on YouTube later, am I?
No,
okay,
just on Facebook.
Thanks.
Don't worry. So this is a question that a student who couldn't be here today wanted to ask in. But a year ago on our campus, we had self-identified students who identified themselves as nationalists organized on campus and used very supremacist language, words like degeneracy, to describe other students on our campus. And seeing as how everything that's kind of happening across the United States with college campuses and the social climate, the question is, would you do anything proactively to ensure that supremacist ideologies are not erupting on our campus and students are not, to ensure that all students are able to get their education and thrive on our campus?
Well, obviously it's a nuanced question. There's a simple answer and it's not good enough, but the answer is no. Now, other than issues of safety and yeah, well, safety being paramount, really. You know, curtailing free speech, no matter how vile and disgusting that it is the thin edge of the wedge. It really is, and really, I think it's pretty tough to do. I know in my own country, sadly, in some ways, the criteria where hate, you know, free speech, vile speech, the criteria to where that becomes hate speech is so high that it's almost impossible to exceed it. So it's almost impossible. It's amazing what you can say and not break the barrier and move into hate speech, which now is a criminal offense at that point. So you have to endure an awful lot of disgusting stuff to get to that level. Sadly, that's the price we pay for having free speech. You know, my view is that you shine more sunlight on it, as much sunlight as you can. You know, the people want to talk, like, give them the biggest room we got and have the fewest people show up. Although some people might say that about me today, but you know, nonetheless. No, I think it's a mistake for an institution to try and parse out what's acceptable to say and what's not acceptable to say, as long as it doesn't hit the threshold of illegality, breaking the law with those comments, threatening someone, et cetera, those kinds of things. For a university to try and begin the business of teasing out what's acceptable and what isn't is a dangerous path to go down, and I would not be in favor of doing that.
To follow up with that, so Boise State, we have made a statement of diversity inclusion, a campus-wide definition, and part of the first bullet point is rejecting all forms of hateful rhetoric.
As you should.
My question then, like, to follow up is, how would then you define hateful rhetoric? Would it be by legality? Is that
No,
is that
no,
what
no,
you're
no,
saying?
no.
So
No.
that's my question, just to
No,
follow
no,
up
no,
with you.
no. No, everything up to that point I'm saying, there's tons of hateful rhetoric that you're going to hear that aren't breaking the law. That's my very point. And yes, you should reject it. Absolutely. Call it out for what it is. But that doesn't mean that I should stop that individual from saying it. That's the difference. I absolutely believe you should call it out for the vile crap that it is. And I would stand up and say, this is, in no uncertain terms, I would stand with you on that same, that I reject these comments. But it doesn't mean that I should stifle that individual in any way or curtail them from saying it. We might need another hour now.
But before I ask the question I'm going to ask, I just want to, in part, when you, as you know, when you come to interviews like this, it's the job of the people who are listening to you to also recruit you and make you think that this is really a neat challenge to be involved with. And so I want to make sure that you know that right on the other side of the river via a walking bridge, river from campus, is, in terms of terrain, probably the largest human rights center in the United States, the core of which is a memorial to Anne Frank, which has a full-size statue of her, which is certainly the only one in the United States and maybe one of the few, if not the only one in the world. And where we display outdoors so people can walk around and see it, the entire 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights on plaques. And then we're in the process, actually fairly far along, in developing a teaching function named for my good friend Marilyn Schuler, who died a little over a year ago and is a legendary human rights activist here in the Northwest. And I want to make sure you knew that was there. The second thing is, I'm very interested in this university cooperation idea that you just posed about dealing with things like mental health or other health issues that impair the ability of students or faculty members to function adequately. Idaho State University is the health-related university for the entire state. And to carry out that function, it tries, obviously it's not well funded either, but, and so there is an ISU Meridian Health Sciences Center, which is probably about 10 miles, maybe a little more from campus, which the object is to mirror all the health-related programs that are available on the main campus in Pocatello, to mirror them here in the Treasure Valley. And I wanted to make sure that you
that's fantastic.
That you knew that.
Yeah,
In
so
other
there's
words,
a point of entry there.
Your idea actually has probably several points of entity, things I don't know about. My question, and again, it's a question for another person in our group who couldn't make it this afternoon, who's a peer advisor for veterans on campus. And of course, this touches on the health issue, the problems of particularly combat veterans that try to come to school. And in the course of conversations with other candidates for the job, we've learned that some of these veterans go to the College of Western Idaho, which is a 2-year school about probably 20 miles away from here to the west. And that the articulation with Boise State, which is supposed to be in place, doesn't work very well. They lose credits, end up having to take things. And the other thing that's not well articulated with the university is providing credit for studies that these veterans have already done. For instance, they're healthcare providers within the military, one of the military branches. And I wondered, I know way too little about Canada, but I was wondering if this is a kind of challenge that you've had to deal with, either in your current position or you've seen it elsewhere, and what kinds of things that you will want to do, particularly very quickly after you arrive, to find out about these problems and hopefully do something about it. The other thing that we have here is a Veterans Administration hospital, which is right down, that's really close to campus, no more than 2 miles
Pretty sure
away.
they're busy.
Yeah,
They're incredibly busy, yeah. Oh, wow, that's a lot of useful information in there. I guess, you know, some of the things that jump out at me, you know, really are about, you know, how do we, well, pathways to this institution should be easy, not difficult, that's for certain. So in my province, like for example, we have a provincial or entity that is the College of Articulation and Transfer. So it defines how the courses transfer between institutions. You meet certain criteria. There are some sort of vetoes that can't, you know, universities can do and say no, you have to meet this standard and that standard. So for example, in the example you give from Western Idaho College, you know, I would want to understand, is the articulation challenge, is it at their end or is it our end? You know, is it that they're not doing what they need to do, or is it that we're just have unrealistic or uncooperative sort of pathway here? I think we need to understand that if it's at their end, then we should be working hard to help them make sure that whatever they're doing does meet the entrance requirements and transferability. We should not have students wasting their precious tuition dollars repeating a course that's largely the same, but not perfectly the same. And is there a way that we can do something that can make up the difference if there's a fundamental difference between the two? Articulation should create pathways. Now, you know, the pathways further afield, whether it's in the next state over or 2 states over, that's a little bit different issue. But within our own state, if there's not a pathway from college, well, I would argue from high school to here, then that's a problem, and we have to fix that. You can do dual credit here at high school. How can you not transfer effectively from a college? That makes no sense to me.
Great. So this is going to be our last question. Is there anyone that hasn't gotten to ask a question that would like to? And if not, is there a last question? Okay.
Hello again. I'd like to ask you a question that just popped up in my head a minute ago. I know you guys, you're coming in here with these all expectations coming in here, and if you do get this job, and when you, of course, try to complete these tasks as you get presented on them, and as well as the future issues coming up, I'd like to ask you though, what do you hope to gain out of coming to this university and helping all of this? Just as a curiosity question.
Well, that's a great question, actually. We don't nearly reflect enough on ourselves and why we do these things. You know, I set high expectations for myself, and what do I hope to gain out of it? You know, there's something that drives you to. Leadership's a funny thing. You know, I talk a lot about how in philanthropy, for example, which is an important part of being a president and leadership in general, there's you get a whole new thrill and a whole new perspective of your career when you can convince people that their money is wisely invested in the students, because really that's ultimately what they invest in, students. Despite, I know you see big buildings going up, but the pitch that was made to that donor was about the students and how that building is going to affect the students. And so I think, you know, what I hope to gain out of it is to have a legacy of affecting even more students than I have already in my career. The more students that you can impact, that's the joy in this job. It really, honestly, as much as it looks fun when you see it in the newspaper or on your case online, you know, cutting a ribbon to open a building in and of itself is not a particularly rewarding experience. It's watching the first students walk in and watching the first graduates come out. That's the exciting part of what we do, and that's what I hope to get out of this.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, for being here.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. So we do. Cool. So we definitely encourage all of you to go to go.boisestate.edu/presidential-search in order to fill out a survey and provide feedback on today's candidate. But thank you again, and enjoy your Friday afternoon.